The night outside was quiet, only the sound of cars passing from time to time. But inside the small diner everything was alive. The clinking of plates, the soft hum of old music from a radio in the corner, and the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. And in the middle of it all was Emily, a young waitress with tired eyes but a smile that never left her face. She moved from table to table carrying trays that looked too heavy for her thin arms. Yet she carried them as if they weighed nothing, because she had no choice. She needed the job. She needed every dollar she could earn. Emily lived in a tiny apartment just a few blocks away. The rent was high for her small income, and every day she counted her tips carefully, saving coins in a jar hidden under her bed. Sometimes she skipped meals just so she could pay the bills. Sometimes she turned off the heater and wrapped herself in blankets during winter. But no one at the diner knew this, because Emily never talked about her problems. She always chose to laugh, to smile, to make others feel lighter even when her own heart felt heavy. Her coworkers often whispered that she was too nice for her own good. They said she had the worst luck in life, always working double shifts, always the one who covered for others when they called in sick. But Emily never complained. She had learned from a young age that complaining did not change anything. Action did. So she worked hard. She served every customer with kindness, and she prayed silently that one day her life would get better. The customers who came to the diner noticed her too. Old couples liked her because she remembered their orders without writing them down. Truck drivers liked her because she always added extra fries when she could. And lonely people liked her because she listened when no one else did. Emily treated everyone as if they mattered, because in her heart she believed that everyone deserved kindness, even if she rarely received it in return. But when the lights went dim at night and the last customer left, Emily's smile would fade. She would sit at the counter with a cup of tea, staring at the reflection of herself in the shiny silver of the coffee machine. She looked older than her age, not because of wrinkles but because of the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. She had grown up without a father. Her mother had worked 2 jobs to raise her, and then sickness had taken her away, leaving Emily alone with nothing but memories and an old photograph tucked in her wallet. She told herself she was strong, that she could survive anything. Yet deep inside she often wished she had someone to lean on, someone who would protect her, someone who would tell her she was not alone. On that particular evening, the diner was unusually quiet. The rain tapped softly against the windows, and Emily wiped down the tables, humming to herself to fill the silence. Her shoes were worn out, the sole almost broken, but she could not afford new ones yet, so she ignored the pain in her feet. She had learned to live with small discomforts. After all, she was used to life being tough. She was used to making sacrifices. She often dreamed of a different life. Sometimes when she walked home at night she imagined what it would be like to live in one of the big houses on the hill, to have warm lights waiting for her, to sit at a table filled with food she did not have to cook alone, to laugh with a family she never had. But then she shook her head and told herself dreams were only dreams. Reality was different, and reality demanded she work hard, smile, and survive one day at a time. Yet despite her struggles, Emily's heart was never bitter. When she saw a child come into the diner with worn shoes like hers, she always gave them an extra cookie. When she saw an old man sitting alone she always asked about his day. And when she found a stray cat outside the diner she brought it scraps of food. She believed in small acts of kindness, even if they cost her a little more effort, because kindness was the only wealth she truly had. That night, as she leaned on the counter and watched the rain fall harder outside, she had no idea that her life was about to change. She thought tomorrow would be the same. Another day of long hours and little pay. Another day of smiles that hid her worries. But fate had already written something different for her, and soon a stranger would walk through the door of the diner. A stranger who carried answers to questions she had buried deep inside. A stranger who would change the course of her life with words she could never have imagined. But for now she was just Emily, the struggling waitress with a brave smile, not knowing that destiny was only a few steps away from finding her. The rain kept falling outside, harder than before, the sound of it beating against the windows filling the empty diner, and Emily wiped her hands on her apron as she looked around. Every table was clean, the chairs neatly pushed in, only the soft glow of the neon sign outside lit the quiet street. It was the kind of night when most people stayed home, curled up in warmth, but Emily knew from experience that sometimes the loneliest people came in during nights like this. And she was right, because just as she turned to pour herself a small cup of coffee, the door creaked open and a man walked in. He looked tired, his coat damp from the rain. His hat pulled low over his face so that only the edge of his jaw showed. He moved slowly, as though the weight of years pressed down on him, and for a moment Emily wondered if he would even make it to the booth by the window where he sat down with a heavy sigh. She could see his hands trembling slightly as he took off his gloves, and his shoulders shook as if the cold had seeped deep into his bones. Emily, always gentle with strangers, walked over with her usual smile, though she studied him carefully. There was something unusual about him, a kind of quiet sadness that hung in the air around him. "Good evening," she said softly, placing a menu on the table. "What can I get for you tonight?" The man lifted his head just slightly, enough for her to see tired eyes that looked like they carried stories untold. He spoke in a low voice, almost a whisper, "Just a coffee, black." And then he lowered his gaze again, as if afraid of being seen too closely. She nodded, but her heart tightened. She could see the way his hands shook when he reached for the cup she later placed in front of him. The way his clothes, though once expensive, were worn at the edges, as if he had not cared for appearances in a long time. He looked like someone who had known better days, someone who had lost something precious along the way. Emily hesitated for a moment, then made a decision. She went back to the kitchen and scooped a bowl of hot soup, added a piece of bread, and carried it to his table, setting it down gently. "This is on the house," she said kindly. "The weather is too cold for only coffee." The man looked up at her sharply, almost startled, as if he wasn't used to kindness anymore. His lips trembled as though he wanted to say something, but instead he simply nodded, and with slow movements he lifted the spoon, tasting the soup, his expression softening for the first time since he had entered. The diner stayed quiet, only the sound of rain outside and the soft clink of his spoon against the bowl. Emily continued wiping the counter but kept glancing at him. Something about the man made her curious. He seemed to study her too, each time she turned. She caught him watching her with an intensity that made her uneasy. But there was no malice in his eyes, only something that felt like recognition, though she could not understand why. After a while, he cleared his throat and spoke, his voice stronger this time. "Why did you do that?" She paused. "Do what?" He looked at the soup, at the bread beside it. "Why give me this? You don't even know me?" She smiled gently. "Because you looked like you needed it, and because sometimes we all need someone to care, even for a small moment." Her words seemed to touch him deeply. His eyes shone as though holding back tears. He nodded slowly and said, "Not many people think that way anymore." Their conversation grew in little pieces. He asked her name. She told him, and then he asked about her work, how long she had been there. She answered lightly, without mentioning her struggles. But the more he asked, the more she sensed he was not just making small talk. His questions carried weight, as if he were searching for something hidden in her answers, and though she tried to brush it off, there was a strange familiarity in the way he looked at her, like someone who had seen her before, though she knew she had never met him. She noticed the way his hands stilled when she spoke of her mother, the way his eyes dropped when she admitted she never knew her father. Only stories her mother had told her, short and unfinished stories she never fully understood. The stranger tightened his grip on the cup of coffee, his knuckles white, and Emily wondered why her simple words seemed to shake him so much. But she did not press him, because Emily was used to respecting silence. She let him sit there with his thoughts, filling his cup again when it emptied, making sure the soup bowl stayed warm, treating him the way she treated everyone, with patience and quiet care. Still, she could not help but wonder about the man who seemed so broken yet so watchful, as if he had walked into that diner not just to escape the rain but to find something, or someone. By the time the clock ticked closer to closing, the man was still there, his hat pulled down again. His gaze fixed on her whenever she wasn't looking. Emily felt the strange weight of his presence, a mystery she could not solve. But she did not know yet that his questions, his watchful eyes, and his trembling hands carried a truth that would shake the ground beneath her. She thought he was only another lonely customer passing through on a rainy night, but in reality, he was about to reveal something that would change her life forever. Interesting Honache in English. ChatGPT said. The rain outside had softened to a gentle drizzle. The streets glistened beneath the yellow glow of the streetlights, and inside the diner the air was warm and calm. Only the hum of the coffee machine and the faint crackle of the radio filled the silence. The stranger sat in the corner booth still sipping from his cup, and Emily, though busy with small tasks, felt his eyes following her every move. not in a way that frightened her, but in a way that carried a strange weight, like he was looking at her and seeing something more than just a waitress. After finishing the soup she had given him, the man finally spoke again, his voice slow and thoughtful. "You didn't have to do that, you know." Emily looked up from wiping the counter. "Do what?" she asked. He gave a small half-smile. "Be kind to me. Most people wouldn't bother." Emily shrugged softly. "Maybe most people forget that kindness is free. It doesn't cost me anything to care." The man stared at her for a long time after that, his eyes almost shining, and Emily felt a little uncomfortable. Yet at the same time she could sense a connection forming, something unspoken building between them. He asked her about her life, but not in a nosy way, in a curious, careful manner, as if each answer meant more to him than she realized. "Do you live close by?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, a few blocks away." "And your family?" he continued. Emily's smile faltered for the first time. "It's just me now. My mother passed away years ago." She lowered her eyes to the floor, trying to hide the flicker of pain that always came with those words. The man's hand trembled slightly as he gripped his cup, his voice barely steady as he asked, "What about your father?" Emily gave a small laugh, though it wasn't filled with joy. "I don't know him. Never met him. My mother didn't talk much about him, only that he left before I was born. So to me he's just a shadow." She spoke lightly as if it didn't matter, but deep inside it always did. She had always wondered who he was, why he left, and if he had ever thought about her. The stranger kept his eyes on her face, his expression unreadable, but Emily noticed the way his jaw tightened, the way he pressed his lips together, as though her words cut him in a place he had been hiding for years. To break the heavy silence, Emily tried to shift the conversation. She asked about him instead. "And what about you, sir? Do you have family?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "I had a family once, but I lost them, or maybe I lost myself." His eyes dropped to the table, and Emily felt a wave of sadness from him. She didn't know what kind of past he carried, but she could feel it was heavy, too heavy for one man alone. Her heart, as always, leaned toward compassion. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Sometimes life takes away more than it gives, but maybe it can still surprise us." He looked up at her again, his gaze deep, as if her words meant more to him than she could ever imagine. The more they spoke, the more Emily felt drawn to him, even though she did not know his name yet. He seemed to listen to her in a way most people never did, as if every word she said mattered, as if he was collecting pieces of her life and placing them carefully inside his heart. He asked about her childhood, what she dreamed of, what she wanted from life, and Emily, though usually guarded, found herself answering honestly. "I've always dreamed of going to school, maybe studying art, but I never had the chance. I had to work. Bills don't wait for dreams," she said with a small laugh. Though her eyes showed a flicker of sadness, the stranger's hand tightened again, his voice low. "You deserved better." The way he said it made her pause, as if he spoke not just as a kind stranger, but as someone who carried guilt for the life she had lived. At one point, Emily noticed his eyes soften in a way that startled her, as though he saw something familiar in her face, something he recognized. He reached up and adjusted his hat, revealing more of his features. His eyes were kind but tired, lined with years of regret, and for a fleeting second she felt as though she had seen those eyes before, not in real life, but in the way she had imagined her father might look if he ever returned. She shook the thought away, reminding herself this was just a stranger, nothing more, but the feeling stayed, haunting her quietly. Their conversation stretched through the night, the diner empty except for the two of them, and even though Emily told herself he was only a customer, deep down she felt something was different. She couldn't explain it, but she knew this meeting was not ordinary. There was a strange connection forming, like invisible threads pulling them closer, and though she did not know it yet, every word she shared was pulling her closer to a truth she had spent her whole life wondering about. A truth that would soon break through the silence and change everything she thought she knew about herself. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. It sounded louder now because the diner was almost empty. The rain had turned into a mist outside, leaving the streets quiet and shining under the streetlights. Emily cleared the last table and placed the chairs neatly, but she kept glancing toward the stranger in the corner. He was still there, sipping slowly from his cup. his hat tilted low, his eyes following her. Every move. There was something about him that made her chest feel tight, a mixture of curiosity and unease, like standing at the edge of something she could not see clearly. He asked her another question, his voice calm but filled with strange intensity. "What was your mother's name?" Emily hesitated. It wasn't the kind of question most customers asked, but she answered anyway. "Her name was Claire." The man's eyes flickered. He leaned back in the booth as if the name had struck something deep inside him. He whispered the name under his breath, almost reverently, as if it belonged to someone he had once loved and lost. Emily noticed the tremor in his hands again. She felt the question was more personal than casual. Trying to keep the moment light, she asked him, "Why do you want to know?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stared at her face with a look that made her uneasy. Not because it was unkind, but because it was searching, as if he were studying her features carefully, her eyes, her smile, even the shape of her chin. And Emily suddenly felt as though he was comparing her to someone else, someone he had known long ago. The silence stretched too long, and she forced a small laugh to break it. "You ask more questions than most people I serve here." The man's lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I suppose I do," he admitted. Then after a pause he asked again, "Where did you grow up?" Emily tilted her head, wondering why a stranger would care about such details. "Here mostly, in this town. I've never been far, couldn't afford to," she said, trying to sound casual. The man's jaw tightened, his eyes softening as though he pitied her. But Emily didn't want pity, so she quickly added, "It's not so bad, small towns have their charm." She tried to smile, but deep inside she felt his gaze cut through her, as though he knew how hard her life really was. He shifted in his seat, lowering his voice. "Did your mother ever tell you anything about your father?" The question struck her harder than the others. She froze for a second, then placed the cloth she had been holding on the counter. "Not much," she admitted slowly. "Only that he left before I was born. She never liked to talk about him. Maybe it hurt too much. Maybe she wanted me to grow without questions, so I stopped asking." Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to keep it steady. The stranger lowered his eyes to the table, his hand tightening around the coffee cup until it shook. Emily felt a strange uneasiness. Why did this man, who she had never met before tonight, care so much about her family, her past, her father? It didn't make sense, and yet there was no threat in him, only sadness, only something heavy pressing down on his shoulders, something he seemed desperate to share but was holding back. She took a step closer to his booth and asked softly, "Why are you asking me all these things?" The man looked up, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name. Regret, longing, maybe even love. But he didn't answer. He simply said, "Sometimes you find people who remind you of things you've lost." Emily felt her heart stir, confused by his words, confused by the way his gaze made her feel like she was more than just a stranger to him, more than just a waitress serving him coffee on a rainy night. For the rest of the shift, his questions continued, but never in a rushed way, always calm, always quiet, each one digging a little deeper into her life, her childhood, her struggles, and each time Emily answered, she felt more and more like he already knew the answers, like he was just confirming something he had suspected all along. She told herself it was just her imagination, that he was simply a lonely old man looking for conversation. But her instincts whispered that it was more than that, much more. As the hours slipped by, Emily noticed something strange about herself too. Usually she kept her distance from customers. She was polite but private. Yet with him she found herself speaking more, telling pieces of her story she rarely shared. Perhaps it was the way he listened, as if nothing else in the world mattered but her words. Or perhaps it was the way his eyes seemed to hold both sorrow and hope at the same time. She felt drawn to him even though a part of her told her to be cautious. By the time the diner was nearly ready to close, Emily was torn between curiosity and suspicion. She wanted to know why he asked about her mother, why he looked at her with such intensity, why his hands shook every time she spoke about her father. But she didn't have the courage to ask directly. Instead, she decided to watch him carefully, to wait and see what he might reveal on his own. She wiped the counter slowly, her heart unsettled, while the stranger sat in silence, his hat still shadowing part of his face, his eyes fixed on her as though he was memorizing every detail. What Emily didn't know was that he had already recognized her, from the first moment she offered him kindness. He had seen his past in her smile, his mistakes in her eyes, his regrets in her story, but he held the truth tightly inside, afraid to speak, afraid to see how she would react. Still, his questions had already planted seeds in her mind, seeds of doubt, of wonder, of suspicion, and soon the answers would come, answers that would turn her entire world upside down. But for that night she remained in the dark, unaware that she was standing on the edge of a truth that would shake her very soul. The night had grown even quieter. The streets outside were empty, only the soft dripping of rainwater from the rooftops filled the silence. Inside the diner the lights glowed warmly, casting long shadows across the floor. Emily stacked the last of the dishes and wiped her hands on her apron. She was ready to close, but the stranger was still there, sitting in the corner booth, his coffee long finished, his hat still pulled low, his presence heavy as though he was waiting for something, waiting for the right moment. Emily walked over politely, her voice gentle. "We're closing soon, sir. Would you like me to pack you something to take?" The man didn't move at first. He simply sat there staring at the empty cup in front of him. Then slowly he raised his head, his eyes glistening under the light, his voice trembling as he said, "Before I go, I need to tell you something." Emily paused. She felt the seriousness in his tone. Her heart thudded a little faster. She slid into the booth across from him, curious but cautious. "What is it?" she asked softly. The man's hands shook as he reached up, removing his hat for the first time completely, and Emily's breath caught in her chest, without the shadow of the brim hiding him. She could see his face clearly, older, lined with years, tired yet strangely familiar. Something about the curve of his nose, the shape of his eyes, it tugged at her memory, like looking into a mirror that reflected not herself but pieces of someone she might have known. Her heart skipped, though she didn't understand why. The silence stretched. Then the man leaned forward, his voice heavy with emotion. "Emily, I'm your father." The words struck her like lightning. For a moment the entire diner seemed to vanish. She heard only the pounding of her heartbeat in her ears. She stared at him, blinking in disbelief. "What?" she whispered, her voice breaking. No, that's not possible." But even as she said it, her mind flashed with the fragments of stories her mother had left behind, the unanswered questions, the mystery of a man who disappeared before she was born, and the resemblance in his eyes now, so painfully clear. Emily shook her head, anger and shock rising in her chest. "If you're my father, where were you all these years? Where were you when I needed you? When my mother was struggling alone, when I was growing up without anyone, when I was starving, when I cried myself to sleep?" Her voice cracked, and her eyes filled with tears. She felt betrayed, broken, and furious all at once. The stranger, her father, lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. "I was a coward," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "I was young, selfish. I thought I could escape responsibility, and I made the worst mistake of my life. I left, and I regretted it. Every single day." Emily wanted to scream, to run, to throw him out of the diner, but something in his trembling voice stopped her. The raw pain, the sincerity, it didn't erase the years of absence, but it made her pause. "Why now?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Why come here, after everything?" He looked at her then, tears finally sliding down his cheeks. "Because I couldn't carry the weight any longer, because I've been searching for you, and because I don't want to die without making things right." Emily's heart twisted painfully. She hated herself for wanting to believe him, for wanting the father she had longed for all her life. But before she could speak, he added something that froze her completely, his words dropping heavy in the air. "And there's something else you should know. I'm a billionaire." For a moment Emily thought she misheard. She blinked, her mouth open in disbelief. "What?" she said again, almost laughing at the absurdity. You're telling me you're my father and you're rich?" The man nodded slowly. "Yes, Emily. I built an empire, money, properties, businesses, but none of it meant anything without you. None of it could fill the emptiness of leaving you behind." Emily stared at him, her mind spinning. The life she had lived, struggling to pay rent, skipping meals, working endless shifts, clashed violently with the idea that her father, the man who abandoned her, had lived surrounded by wealth, power, and luxury. Her chest burned with anger. "So you had everything?" she whispered bitterly. "And you let me suffer with nothing?" Tears rolled down her cheeks now, hot and unstoppable. "Do you have any idea what my life has been? Do you know how many nights I went to bed hungry, wishing for someone to care? And you were out there with all your money." The man reached across the table, his hands shaking. "Emily, I know, and I hate myself for it. I can't change the past, but I can change the future. I don't want to buy your forgiveness. I just want to be your father. I want to give you what you deserve, not only the wealth, but my love, my presence, my time, if you'll let me." Emily pulled her hands back, torn between fury and longing. She could see the regret etched into his face, the pain in his eyes, but her wounds were too deep. She wanted to believe him, but she didn't know if she could. Silence fell heavy between them, broken only by the soft ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the radio. Finally, Emily stood, her hands trembling, her voice hoarse. "I don't care about your money. I never did. All I ever wanted was a father who didn't leave," she whispered, her tears falling freely. "And now you show up after all this time, expecting me to accept you just like that? It's not that simple." The man nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. "I know it's not. I don't expect forgiveness in a night. I just beg for a chance to show you that I can be the father you deserved all along." His words hung in the air, and Emily, broken between rage and hope, didn't know whether to push him away forever or hold onto the possibility of finally having the one thing she had missed her entire life. That night in the empty diner, two lives collided. A daughter who had grown strong through pain and loneliness, and a father who had returned with regret and a fortune that meant nothing compared to the love he had lost. The truth was out now, and nothing would ever be the same again. Emily sat frozen in the booth, her hands clenched tightly together on her lap, her chest rising and falling too fast. She could not believe what she had just heard. The words still echoed in her mind like a loud bell she could not silence. "I'm your father, and I'm a billionaire." It sounded like something out of a movie, not her life, not the life of a simple waitress who had worked her fingers to the bone just to survive. She stared at the man across from her, the man who had carried such sadness in his eyes, the man who now claimed to be the one she had spent her whole life wondering about. Her first instinct was disbelief. It had to be a lie. Maybe he was crazy. Maybe he was a cruel old man playing some kind of sick joke. But then she looked into his eyes again and saw the resemblance she had tried to deny. The same eyes that looked back at her from the mirror every morning, and her heart trembled. She hated herself for seeing it, hated herself for feeling even a flicker of recognition. Her voice came out sharp, almost breaking. "You expect me to believe this? That you're my father? That you've been out there living rich while I was here scraping pennies together?" The man, her father, lowered his eyes, his voice shaking. "I don't expect you to believe me right away, Emily. I only hope you will give me a chance to prove it." But his words only made her angrier. Her fists trembled on the table. "A chance? Do you have any idea what I went through? Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep wishing my father would come for me? Do you know how many times I wanted someone to tell me I wasn't alone?" Tears filled her eyes, but they were hot with rage, not sorrow. She had built her life without him. She had survived hunger, loneliness, the crushing weight of being unwanted. And now this stranger wanted to walk in and claim her as his. It felt unfair, cruel even. Her voice cracked as she continued. "Where were you when Mom worked 2 jobs until she got sick? Where were you when I buried her? Where were you when I needed you most?" Her father's hands shook as he reached across the table, but Emily pulled hers back sharply, her body stiff. He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "I was lost, Emily. I was selfish. I was afraid of responsibility. I thought I could run from it all, but I never stopped thinking about you. I never stopped regretting what I did. I built a life of success, but it was empty. Every dollar, every house, every luxury reminded me of what I left behind." He lowered his head, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I only want the chance to be in your life now." Emily wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him it was too late, that his regret meant nothing compared to her years of pain. but a small voice deep inside her whispered something she didn't want to hear. It whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. Maybe he was her father. Maybe he was the piece of her life she had longed for without even knowing it. The thought tore her apart. She wanted to believe and reject him at the same time. Her heart and her mind were at war. Her disbelief grew stronger when she thought about the second part of his confession. The billionaire part. It sounded ridiculous. "You're rich? Really?" She laughed bitterly through her tears. "Do you know how that makes me feel? All those nights I skipped meals, all those days I wore shoes with holes, all the times I counted coins just to buy bread. And you were out there with more money than you could spend. Do you realize what that means? You let me suffer when you could have changed my life with a single phone call." Her father winced at her words, his shoulders heavy with shame. "I know," he whispered. "And that is my greatest sin. No amount of money can erase what I did. But I want to use it to make things right. Not to buy your love, but to give you the life you always deserved. A life where you don't have to suffer anymore." His voice cracked again, raw with desperation. "Emily, I don't want to die with you still hating me." Emily's tears flowed freely now, but her anger stayed. "It's not about money. Don't you get it? I never needed a billionaire father. I needed a father who stayed, a father who cared." She whispered painfully, her heart aching. "And now I don't know what to feel. I don't know if I should scream at you, or hug you, or walk away forever." The silence between them grew thick, the diner empty except for the sound of her quiet sobs and his shaky breaths. Emily's disbelief was not only about his words. It was about the sudden storm in her own heart. She had spent her whole life dreaming of this moment, meeting her father, imagining what it would feel like. And now that it had happened, it was nothing like the dream. It was messier harder, more painful than she could have ever imagined. She leaned back against the booth, covering her face with her hands, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Why now? Why after all these years?" He looked at her with eyes full of sorrow. "Because I was afraid for too long. But fear can't be an excuse forever. I couldn't carry the weight anymore. I had to find you. I had to tell you the truth." He hesitated, his voice trembling. "Even if you never forgive me." Emily slowly dropped her hands, her eyes swollen with tears. She stared at him, torn between the hatred she wanted to hold and the love she had buried for a father she never knew. She shook her head, whispering, "I don't know if I can ever forgive you." But even as she said it, a small part of her heart longed for the possibility, longed for the father she had missed all her life. She hated herself for it, but she could not deny it. That night, Emily's world cracked open. Disbelief and pain clashed with hope and longing. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew that the stranger sitting across from her was no longer just a stranger. He was her father, and whether she accepted it or not, her life would never be the same again. Emily sat in silence, the diner now completely empty except for her and the man who called himself her father. The clock ticked on the wall, each sound loud in the stillness. Her heart was torn in two, one part filled with rage at the years of loneliness he had left her in, the other part aching with the longing she had always carried, the longing for a father, the longing for family. She pressed her trembling hands together, her mind racing in circles. She knew she had to decide something, but every choice felt like it would break her. Her father leaned forward, his face pale and desperate, his voice soft but heavy with emotion. "Emily, I know I have no right to ask anything from you. I know I failed you more than anyone should ever fail a child. But please, don't shut the door on me now. I am not here to flaunt my wealth. I am here to ask for a chance, just a chance to prove that I can be the father you deserved all along." His words hung in the air, and Emily felt her chest tighten. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him to leave, but the raw pain in his voice stopped her. His eyes were not those of a proud, rich man. They were the eyes of someone who had lost everything that mattered. She leaned back in her seat, wiping her tears quickly. "You don't understand?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "All my life I told myself I didn't need you. I told myself I was strong enough on my own. I built walls around my heart so I wouldn't miss you, so I wouldn't feel the pain of you not being there. And now you walk in and tear those walls down in one night, and I don't know what to do with all this pain. I don't know if I can let you in, because if I do and you leave again, it will destroy me." Her father's eyes filled with tears. He shook his head firmly. "I will never leave again, Emily, I swear it. I can't erase the years I abandoned you. But I can give you the years we have left. I can stand beside you now. I can show you love now, if only you'll let me. I don't want your forgiveness all at once. I only want a chance to earn it slowly, day by day, if you'll allow me to try. Emily's heart ached at his words, but she still felt the deep wound of abandonment. She thought of her mother, working endless hours, coughing through sickness, carrying the weight of 2 lives alone. She thought of herself as a little girl staring at the door, always wishing someone would walk through it and say, "I'm here." But no one ever did. She thought of her teenage years, lying awake at night imagining a father who might come to her graduation, or sit at the table during holidays, or simply hold her hand when she was scared. All those moments were stolen, and no amount of money or apologies could bring them back. She lowered her gaze, her voice shaking. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to trust you? You are the one who should have been there, and you weren't. You're the one who left me to grow up with nothing, and now you're asking me to let you in like it's that easy? Do you think a few words and a fortune can make me forget the pain?" Her father shook his head. "No, Emily. I don't expect you to forget. I don't even expect you to forgive me right away. I only hope you will let me try to be here for you now. Even if it takes the rest of my life to earn a piece of your trust, I am willing to do it." The night had grown long. The neon sign outside flickered as if even it was tired, and the diner was quiet, almost too quiet. Emily sat there across from the man who had turned her world upside down. Her face still damp with tears, her hands trembling on the table, her heart heavy yet strangely lighter at the same time. She had given him an answer, not forgiveness, not acceptance, but a chance, and that small word felt like the beginning of something new, something uncertain, something frightening, but also something she had secretly longed for all her life. Her father looked at her with eyes that shone with gratitude and relief, his shoulders finally dropping as though a heavy weight had been lifted. He whispered again, "Thank you, Emily, you don't know what this means." And for the first time that night, his lips curved into a faint, shaky smile. It wasn't the smile of a rich man. It was the smile of a father who had been given hope after years of regret. Emily stared at him, still unsure if she could trust that smile. But she could not deny the warmth it brought to her heart. She stood slowly, removing her apron and hanging it on the hook near the counter. The diner owner nodded at her from behind the register, silently giving her space. Her co-workers pretended to busy themselves in the back, but she knew they were listening, watching quietly. They all felt the weight of what had happened. It wasn't every day that a waitress discovered her father was alive, present, and a billionaire. Emily grabbed her coat and turned to the man. "Come on," she said softly, her voice still shaky but steady enough to carry. "We can't sit here all night." He rose from the booth, slower than her, his legs stiff from sitting too long, his hat now resting in his hands. He looked different without it, older, more fragile, but also more human, as if removing the hat had removed the last barrier between them. They stepped out into the cool night air together. The rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the lamplight, and the silence of the town surrounded them. Emily pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. She felt nervous walking beside him, like walking with a stranger who was supposed to be family. She didn't know how to feel, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. For a long time, they walked in silence, their footsteps echoing softly on the wet pavement. Emily's mind replayed everything he had said, every confession, every word of regret, every plea for a second chance. Part of her still wanted to scream at him, but another part felt strangely calm, as if just knowing the truth had lifted a weight she didn't even realize she carried. She had always imagined her father as a ghost, a nameless man who had abandoned her without care. But now here he was, flesh and blood, flawed and broken, yet real, and that reality, painful as it was, gave her a strange sense of closure. They stopped at the corner where the streetlight buzzed faintly. Emily turned to him, her eyes still red but steadier now. "Listen," she said quietly. "I don't care about your money. I don't want it. What I want is honesty. I don't want promises you can't keep. If you say you'll stay, then stay. If you say you'll be there, then be there. Don't disappear again, because if you do, I won't forgive you a second time." Her voice was firm, her pain giving her strength, and her father nodded quickly, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear, Emily, I will not leave again. I will earn your trust. I will prove to you that I can stay." For the first time that night, Emily felt a small spark of hope, not because of his words, but because of the way he said them, broken, desperate but true. She still didn't know if she could forgive him. She still didn't know if she could love him, but she knew she wanted to try, and that in itself was more than she ever expected when she woke up that morning. She had thought it would be another long shift, another night of wiping tables and counting coins. She never imagined it would end with her walking beside her father for the first time in her life. They reached her small apartment building, its walls cracked, its lights flickering. Her father looked at it with quiet sorrow, his chest rising and falling heavily. He could see the life she had lived, the struggle she had endured, and guilt washed over him again. "You deserved better," he whispered, but Emily shook her head, her voice calm. "It's not about what I deserved, it's about what I survived, and I survived without you. Don't forget that." He lowered his eyes, nodding. "I won't forget, Emily, I promise." As they stood at the entrance, Emily hesitated, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to end the night. Finally she sighed and said softly, "This doesn't mean everything is fixed, it doesn't mean I forgive you. It just means I'm willing to see what happens next." He nodded again, his eyes shining with tears. "That's all I could ever ask for," he whispered, and in that moment, though her heart was still heavy, she felt a strange peace settle over her. A fragile peace, but one that gave her the strength to hope. Emily opened the door to her building, stepping inside, but before she closed it, she turned back and looked at him one more time, her voice soft but clear. "Good night, Dad." The word felt strange on her tongue, unfamiliar yet powerful. His entire face lit up with emotion, tears spilling freely. He whispered back, "Good night, Emily." And for the first time in years, he felt like life had given him a second chance. Inside her apartment, Emily leaned against the door, her heart still racing, her mind still spinning. But a small smile curved on her lips through her tears. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't love yet. But it was a beginning, a fragile new beginning. And as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she realized that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't about struggle alone anymore. Maybe it was about healing, about family, about second chances. And though the road ahead would be long, she finally felt she wasn't walking it completely alone.